They say there are moments that divide our lives into before and after. Mine happened on an autumn afternoon, with a worn suitcase at my feet and my 3-month-old daughter asleep against my chest. The door of the house where I grew up closed with a soft click. No shouting, no drama, just a definitive closure, as if I were a visitor who had overstayed their welcome. My name is Emily. I'm 29 now. But that day I was only 19. A girl holding another, smaller girl, both without a place in the world we should call home. It all began 3 years earlier, when my mother passed away. It was my 16th birthday. They said it was quick, a sudden heart condition. In the days that followed, the house filled with that peculiar silence that only great tragedies can produce. That's when Jessica became more present. Jessica had been my best friend since I was 7. During those first months after my mother's departure, her presence was like a beacon in the darkness. "I'll take care of you, Em," she promised one night, and she kept her promise, just not in the way I had imagined. Gradually, Jessica began to occupy spaces beyond my room. She started preparing dinners, tidying the house, organizing bills. I didn't notice the subtle changes, the way my father dressed up more when he knew she would come, the low conversations that ceased when I entered the room. It was on an ordinary Friday that my world collapsed for the second time. I came home from school early. They were sitting on the couch, hands intertwined. "Emily, Jessica and I wanted to talk to you. Your mother would want us to move forward," my father said, his voice firm. 11 months and 17 days, I corrected automatically, because I counted. Every day without her. "We didn't plan this," Jessica finally spoke, her voice soft. "It happened naturally. Naturally. As if it were natural for a 20-year-old girl to get involved with her best friend's father. The wedding announcement came 3 months later. On the wedding day, I locked myself in my room. From my window, I saw the guests in the yard, toasting under the same trees where I had celebrated birthdays with my mother. That's how I met Nathan. He was 19 and had a motorcycle that made too much noise. Nathan became my escape. Our relationship progressed quickly, driven more by my need for escapism than any deep connection. When I discovered I was pregnant, Nathan had already begun to distance himself. "Are you sure it's mine?" was the first thing he said. "Look, I can't help you with this. I have plans." At that moment, I realized I was truly alone. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage to tell them. I entered the room where my father and Jessica were watching television, the positive test in an envelope. Without words, I handed the envelope to my father. I saw the emotions pass: confusion, understanding, shock, and that deep disappointment. "You have 2 options," he declared. "Either you resolve this discreetly, and we can help with that, or you're on your own." "Are you telling me to terminate the pregnancy?" I asked, needing confirmation. "You're 17, Emily. Your whole life ahead of you. It's a baby, your grandchild. It's a mistake that can still be corrected," he replied coldly. The choice I made that day was simple and absolute. I never considered the first option. And with that decision, the countdown to my departure began. In the months that followed, I turned 18. My belly grew along with the abyss between us. When Lily was born, a nurse asked if I wanted to call my father. I shook my head. I called him when we were ready to be discharged. At home, the tension was palpable. I tried to be invisible, caring for Lily in silence. But babies cry, need constant attention. Each night cry was followed by heavy sighs from the other side of the wall. A month after turning 19, my father called me to his office. "Emily, you're an adult now and a mother. It's time to fully assume your responsibilities." He slid an envelope across the desk. This should help at the beginning. Inside was enough money for 3 months' rent in a modest place. The message was clear. My time there was over. And so, on an autumn afternoon, I walked out the front door with my daughter in my arms. There was no crying, no pleading, just the absolute certainty that, from that moment on, Lily and I would have only each other. The first night away from home was in a small roadside hotel. Lily slept in the center of the double bed while I counted the money for the 3rd time, calculating how long it would last. 3 months, maybe 4 if I saved on food. The next morning, I began the search for a place to live. I found a room at the back of an elderly lady's house, who offered reduced rent in exchange for small household help. Mrs. Eleanor was 78, blue eyes clouded by cataracts and trembling hands that became firm when she held Lily for the first time. "A child brings life to the house," she said, cradling my daughter with a naturalness that made me swallow hard. The room had space only for a bed, an improvised crib, and a small dresser. The bathroom was shared, as was the kitchen. It wasn't what I had dreamed for us, but it was our beginning. My days became an exhausting routine. In the morning, I worked as an attendant at a local pharmacy. Lily stayed with Mrs. Eleanor, who was increasingly enchanted with my little one. In the afternoon, I returned to care for her while trying to study to complete high school through equivalency exams. At night, when Lily slept, I did audio transcriptions for an online company. There were nights when I fell asleep on the books, too exhausted to reach the bed. There were days when I cried in the bathroom at work, hidden, missing a family that no longer existed. And there were moments, especially when Lily smiled or held my finger with her tiny hand, when I thought, it's worth it. On the first Christmas away from home, I received a postcard. It had no return address, but I recognized Jessica's handwriting. "Hope you are well," it simply said. No questions about the granddaughter, no invitation to return. I threw the card away. When Lily turned 1, I organized a small celebration. Mrs. Eleanor made a cake, and some colleagues from work brought simple gifts. I took photos so that one day she could see that, even with little, her first birthday was celebrated with love. That same week, I received news that I had been approved for a full scholarship in nursing. The university was an hour away by bus, but offered daycare for students' children. It was the first time in a long time that I allowed myself to cry with joy. The college years were a constant struggle. Waking up at 5 in the morning, dropping Lily at daycare, attending classes, working night shifts at the university hospital, studying during the early hours. My only moments of rest were those when I lay beside my daughter and told made-up stories about princesses who saved themselves. Lily grew strong, curious, and surprisingly happy. She never asked about her father or her grandparents. For her, our small family of 2 was complete and sufficient. I graduated among the best in my class. At the ceremony, Lily, then 5 years old, held a small bouquet of flowers she had picked from Mrs. Eleanor's garden. When my name was called, she shouted, "Mom!" with so much pride that several faces turned to smile. At that moment, I realized we had made it. Against all odds, we had survived. With the diploma came a stable job at the municipal hospital. For the first time, I could rent a modest apartment just for the 2 of us. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen where Lily and I made cookies on Sundays. It wasn't luxurious, but it was our home. Over the years, I built a solid professional reputation. I specialized in geriatric care, an area I discovered I deeply loved, perhaps influenced by Mrs. Eleanor, who stayed with us until she peacefully passed in her sleep when Lily was 7. There was no contact with my father or Jessica during all this time. Sometimes I wondered how they were, if they thought about us. But these questions came less and less, replaced by everyday concerns. School meetings, medical appointments, planning modest vacations. On special days, like Lily's birthdays, I allowed myself to think about how it would be if my mother were alive, if she had met her granddaughter. In these moments, I told Lily stories about her, keeping alive the only part of my family that truly mattered. Lily grew up looking more and more like me, but with a confidence and joy that I had lost too early. She didn't carry the weight of abandonment that I knew so well. For her, our story began with us, not with absences. On the eve of Lily's 10th birthday, as we prepared invitations for her small party together, the doorbell rang. It was a quiet Sunday. We weren't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, time seemed to freeze. Jessica was standing in the hallway, aged beyond her 33 years, her eyes heavy with deep dark circles. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was Lily who broke the silence, appearing curious behind me. "Who is it, Mom?" The innocent question echoed through the corridor, marking the end of 10 years of silence and the beginning of a chapter I never planned to write. "Emily." Jessica's voice trembled slightly. "Can we talk?" I looked at Lily, then back at the woman who once was everything to me. Best friend, confidant, and finally the person who took the last piece of my family. "Lily, sweetheart, can you finish writing the invitations? I'll be right back." I tried to keep my voice steady. Lily nodded, curious but obedient, casting a final glance at Jessica before returning to the living room. I stepped into the hallway, partially closing the door behind me. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" I kept my voice low, controlled. "It wasn't easy," she replied, nervously rubbing her hands. I looked in the nursing professional registry, then on social media. I called 3 Emilys before finding the right address. 10 years, I said simply. 10 years without a word, without a call. Jessica lowered her eyes. I know, there's no justification, but I need to talk to you. It's about your father. Something cold settled in my chest. As much as I tried to deny it, those words still had the power to affect me. What about him? He's sick, Emily. Very sick. Her voice faltered. Degenerative neurological condition. The doctors gave him a few months. I took a deep breath, trying to process the information. Part of me wanted to close the door, protect myself from this pain that no longer belonged to me. Another part, the part that was still a daughter, felt a sharp pang of concern. I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't understand what you expect from me. Can we talk somewhere? Not here in the hallway. She looked around, visibly uncomfortable. Against my better judgment, I agreed. There's a cafe on the corner. I'll get my purse. In the small cafe, with untouched cups of tea between us, Jessica revealed everything. My father's company had gone bankrupt 2 years before. Risky investments, poor management. The house where I grew up had been sold to cover debts. They now lived in a rented apartment, much smaller than they were used to. When the diagnosis came, 6 months ago, we used what was left of our savings for experimental treatments. She looked exhausted, aged beyond her years. Now there's nothing left. Health insurance doesn't cover half the medications, and he needs constant care. And you came to me for money? I asked, involuntary bitterness coloring my voice. No, she seemed genuinely horrified. I didn't even think about that. Emily, you're a nurse, a specialist. You understand the medical system, know how to navigate it. We're lost, not knowing which questions to ask, what rights we have. There are social workers in hospitals for that. I know, but she took a deep breath. Your father is deteriorating rapidly, and she hesitated. He asks about you, especially in recent days. I think he's trying to put things in order before. I couldn't respond immediately. So many contradictory emotions battled within me. Anger at the abandonment, fear of the definitive loss, guilt for feeling anything beyond indifference. Why now, Jessica? Why not 5 years ago? Or when Lily was born? Why wait until he's dying? Tears streamed down her face. Because I was a coward. Because each passing year made it harder to take the first step. Because I feared you would reject us, as we would have deserved. Her honest acknowledgement caught me off guard. Your father never forgave himself, she continued. He keeps all the news articles about you at the hospital, knows about your specialization. When Lily was born, he wanted to go to the hospital, but thought you wouldn't want him there. He was right, I replied dryly, but without the conviction I expected to feel. We returned to the apartment in silence. At the door, before leaving, Jessica handed me a small card with an address and phone number. Just think about it, please. If not for him, maybe. She looked toward the door, where Lily had been earlier. Maybe for her. She has the right to know her grandfather, don't you think? After Jessica left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. Lily came to find me, her eyes curious and much more perceptive than I would like. Who was that lady, Mom? Why are you crying? I hadn't noticed the tears streaming down my face. I pulled Lily onto my lap, though she was already too big for it. She was someone I knew a long time ago, I answered honestly, and she brought news that made me sad. News about Grandpa? Asked Lily, surprising me. How do you know about that? I heard you talking, she admitted, without remorse. You never talk about Grandpa or Grandma, just about your mom, who went to heaven before I was born. In that moment, I realized I had deprived Lily of part of her story. In trying to protect her from rejection, I had also hidden the possibility of connection. I spent the whole night awake, turning over all the possibilities in my head. By morning, I had made my decision. I called the number Jessica had left. I'll help, I said when she answered, her voice still rough with sleep, but on my terms. The first reunion with my father was more difficult than I imagined. The man sitting in the armchair by the window hardly resembled the authoritarian businessman who had expelled me from home a decade ago. Thinner, hair completely gray, hands slightly trembling holding a cup of tea. His eyes, however, remained the same, and widened when he saw me standing at the door. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Me, assessing the damage the disease had already caused. He, perhaps assessing how time had transformed me. "Emily," he finally said, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still carrying that characteristic firmness. "You came." "I came as a nurse," I clarified, maintaining emotional distance as I approached to clinically assess his condition. "Jessica said you need medical guidance." He nodded slowly, accepting the terms I was establishing. For the next 40 minutes, I kept our interaction strictly professional. I reviewed his medication, noted his symptoms, developed a more efficient care plan. I explained about government assistance programs that could reduce medication costs. When I finished, I put away my notebook and prepared to leave. That's when he spoke. "She looks like you." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. "Who?" "Your daughter, Lily. Jessica showed me photos she found online." He hesitated. "She has your eyes." I turned slowly. "She has much more than that. She has my strength, my determination, things I had to develop when I was left alone." The verbal blow was intentional, and I saw it hit the target when he looked away. "I deserve that," he murmured. "I deserve your hatred." "It's not about deserving," I replied. "And it's not hatred I feel. It's indifference. It was a lie, of course. If it were true indifference, I wouldn't be there, nor would I have felt that pang in my chest seeing him so fragile." The following week I returned with Lily. A difficult decision, but one I considered necessary after much reflection. She had the right to form her own opinions, to know her complete story, and perhaps, secretly, I wanted my father to see what he had lost, the extraordinary girl I had raised alone. "Lily, this is your grandfather Richard," I formally introduced when we arrived. My daughter, always sociable and curious, approached without hesitation. "You look sick," she observed with the brutal honesty of children. "Mom is the best nurse in the world. She'll make you better." I saw something break in my father's expression. A sad smile appeared on his wrinkled face. "She was always good at taking care of others," he replied, looking at me with a mixture of pride and regret that caught me off guard. In the weeks that followed, we established a routine. I visited 3 times a week, adjusting medications, coordinating consultations with specialists, training Jessica for basic care. Lily occasionally accompanied me, developing a growing affection for the grandfather who told stories of my childhood, edited and softened versions, of course. It was during one of these visits, while Lily explored the small balcony of the apartment and Jessica prepared tea in the kitchen, that we finally had the long-delayed conversation. "Why did you do that?" I asked simply. "Throw me out when I needed you most." My father was silent for so long that I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with emotion. "Because I was a proud fool. Because I thought I was teaching you responsibility, when in fact I was punishing you for reminding me how fallible I was." He took a deep breath, with difficulty. "Because after your mother passed, I lost my moral compass. And when you got pregnant, all I saw was my failure as a father. It was my choice," I argued. "Not your failure, but I should have supported your choice," he replied. "As you did with Lily. You're a better mother than I ever was a father." There was no satisfaction in his confession, only a deep sadness for the lost time we would never recover. As the months passed, my father's condition worsened. I transferred some of my shifts to be more present. Not for him, I told myself, but for Lily, who had developed genuine affection for her grandfather, and perhaps for Jessica too, who seemed as lost and exhausted as I had been a decade ago. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after helping my father with breathing exercises, I found Jessica crying silently in the kitchen. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, when she noticed my presence. "After everything we did, I'm not doing this for gratitude," I interrupted. "I'm doing it because it's right, because I'm better than the abandonment I received." She nodded, wiping away tears. "You were always the best of us, even when we were children. I just wanted so much to be like you, that I ended up trying to take your place. First as his daughter, then..." She didn't complete it, but it wasn't necessary. When my father passed away, 3 months later, it was at home, as he had requested, with Lily holding one of his hands, and me professionally monitoring his vital signs. His last days were of surprising lucidity, as often happens. He made a point of updating his will, leaving Lily an educational fund with the little he had managed to preserve. At the small, discreet funeral, I was surprised by my own grief, not for the loss of the father who had expelled me, but but for the loss of what we could have been, if pride and resentment hadn't stolen a decade of our lives. Jessica sought me out after the ceremony. "What happens now?" she asked, seeming genuinely lost. "Now each goes her own way," I answered honestly. "We won't be a picture-perfect family, Jessica. There are damages that can't be undone." But I hesitated, surprising myself with the words that would follow. "Lily would like to keep in touch, and I won't prevent it." On the way home, Lily held my hand on the bus. "I'm sad about Grandpa," she said thoughtfully, "but happy that we got to know him before." "Me too," I admitted, realizing it was true. Months later, when Jessica came to dinner at our apartment for the first time, bringing a birthday present for Lily, I realized I had found a form of peace I didn't imagine possible. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, nor forgetting. It was something more complex, the understanding that people are fallible, that relationships can be redefined, and that true strength lies not in rejecting connections, but in establishing them on our own terms. The girl who left home with a suitcase and a baby had become a woman, capable of defining her own boundaries without being consumed by resentment. The answer I gave wasn't revenge or rejection. It was the liberation from a cycle that could have imprisoned me forever. There are no perfect endings in real stories, only imperfect new beginnings. Mine came when I understood that family isn't just who's there from the start, it's also who you choose to let in, on your terms, with your boundaries clearly established. And in this redefinition, I found something that abandonment never managed to take from me: the power to choose my own path, not as a victim of the past, but as the architect of my future.